Welcome to the Dev Launch Podcast, bringing you insights from industry experts on how to grow the digital agency you love. In this episode, we're joined by Nick Petroski of Promethean Research to tackle the highs, the lows, and everything in between for digital agencies in 2023, 2024, and beyond. From adapting to market shifts to mastering specialization, Nick shares data-driven insights that are going to help you thrive in these uncertain times. Well, if it isn't the man, the myth, the legend, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the Dev Launch Podcast. I really appreciate having you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to chat again.
Yeah, this is so good. And for the listeners who don't know, first of all, shame on you. Like, how do you not know Promethean Research? They do such excellent work in gathering some benchmarking data. I know I've learned a lot from the work you've put out there, but for people who are listening to this and they're like, "No, I haven't heard about this guy. Who is he? How would you characterize, what you guys do over at Promethean Research?"
Yeah, good question. I've spent almost a decade doing super deep research into what makes digital agencies successful. And that spans everything from revenue generation and strategy all the way through any kind of detailed operations you can imagine. Um, and I spend my time now writing reports and guides and long-winded newsletters on what I've found and the patterns that these successful agencies have, so that hopefully it makes it a little easier for you to run a successful agency. And if you get to that spot where you're like, I don't want to DIY this, I also do strategy consulting to help kind of bridge that gap between reading the report and putting it into practice.
Yeah. And I think I myself came across your work. Actually, one of my clients referred your work to me because we were talking about, I think, having to do with figuring out like what are normal effective hourly rates and industry standards and stuff like that. So that's how I was originally connected. And then we just became fast friends because Nick is one of those guys that's just very enjoyable to have conversations with. So
Likewise.
yeah. So, and given the position you're in, being in a lot of ways kind of a data aggregator and seeing probably a much broader swath of digital agencies that are out there, I think you can probably speak pretty well to this. But I'd love to maybe start our conversation off with some big picture landscape questions here. I think from my own experience last year, I've heard just anecdotally a lot of digital agencies really struggle to close clients. There's just this apprehension that we felt. Some people in 2024, they saw a boost kind of come back in, but then I'm also hearing some mixed stories, and some people are really growing great, other people's really struggling. So I'd love to get your thoughts and your take on the landscape all the way back from 2020 to where we are today in 2024.
Yeah. I've been watching this for a while now, and I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to answer your question plus some. So, throughout the 2010s, really, you had to almost try to fail at running an agency, and that sounds kind of like callous, I guess, but everybody was so interested in various forms of digital transformation, everything from what was big back then, big data, um, responsive web design. Like, you had some things that accessibility, you had certain things that were driving this really well. And there were enough little places and little pockets throughout the industry that you could carve something out really fairly easily. And then 2020 hit and the pandemic hit. And if you remember, a few, I don't know, years before that, like 2018, 2019, everybody was kind of a little bit on edge. Like, there was a little bit like, when's the recession coming? Oh my God, the yield curve, look at it. We're going to have a recession. And I remember I was having a conversation with somebody at a conference, an agency owner, and he was like, I know this is coming. And this was like, I want to say November, December of 2019. And I was like, you need a catalyst, was my argument. And you have to have something that kicks this off. Like, yes, the economy may be fragile back then, but you need something that actually starts this thing going that makes it bad for everybody else, and everybody pulls back spending, and then all of a sudden things go awry. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So I can't like justify personally positioning agencies to be turtles in the eventual idea that there's some recession. Like, keep a cash cushion that makes you feel comfortable, but continue investing in growth. That was 2019. 2020 hits and the pandemic comes. Maybe early summer, during this like midsummer kind of thing of 2020, everybody was still pulling back spend. People were like, we don't know what's going on. We don't know if like vaccines are coming online. We don't know if this thing's going to be around for 5 years. We don't know if this is the new normal was talked about all the time. So that made businesses really kind of turtle up and not spend even on digital stuff. And then I would say in the fall ish, once the PPP loans were distributed and you had the EIDL loans go out, and businesses were flush with cash because they realized like, oh, we still have to like keep doing stuff. We're still selling our trinkets or whatever the heck you're selling. And agencies were like, hey, no one's in person right now. We enable digital transformation. We let you connect with people
Mm.
digitally. We let you uh, put menus digitally. Nobody wants that, but you were able to do it, right? So you had this massive pull in business spending on digital transformation that
Mm.
occurred in late 2020 and throughout 2021.
Mm.
They pulled in maybe the next 5 years of spending. And we're like, we're doing this now. We need all these projects done. People couldn't hire fast enough. If you remember salaries for digital knowledge workers in 2021, they were going through the roof. We did salary surveys and we saw some positions increasing by like 40 and 50% on
Ooh,
average.
that's
And
wild.
like that was the demand though.
Hmm.
People like businesses really wanted this stuff and they were willing to pay absolutely crazy prices to get it.
Hmm.
And so you had this kind of mad dash for talent and everybody upping their salary costs. And then throughout the like tail end of 21 and into 22, people were raising prices. So agencies were raising prices. Sorry. And so you had this like shift to like, oh, our biggest cost is now going up by crazy percentages. We weren't prepared for that. So we now need to raise all of our prices. And there was a lot of like, you talk about this like jagged frontier in the AI space of like what it's capable of. There was a jagged frontier in agencies who actually raised rates and those who didn't. And so you saw these ones that raised rates early and often, and they were able to outgrow and outpace a lot of the industry then. And so you had this bifurcation where there were the ones that were slow to raise rates, didn't want to have those conversations with their clients because maybe their rev gen was a little shaky, maybe they didn't have stuff in place. And then you had this other side that absolutely did raise rates and did fantastic, and they kind of outgrew everybody else. Uh, Welcome to 2020, back half of 2022, early 2023. Stuff started drying up. Like people went back to in-person stuff. And the ultimate agency clients stopped that kind of crazy spend. And they pulled that back in and they're like, okay, we're seeing inflation, we're seeing some economic uncertainty, not recession, but uncertainty. We don't know if we can continue this level of spend. We're going to hold off on projects. So 2023 was like the brutal awakening for a lot of agencies because you still had some that had higher staffing costs. They didn't build out repeatable rev gen systems or strategies. They didn't raise pricing. And now all of a sudden, people were half their clients was like, we're not going to be spending anymore.
Mm.
And so you had this big, massive drop off in agency growth. And I one of my combination reports, we looked at a few different surveys we did, and I think the average growth rate was something like 4.5 to 6%,
Hmm.
when normally it's like 15%.
Well, and not only that, but like inflation being what it was, like that
Yes,
almost completely obliterates whatever growth you would have gotten otherwise.
absolutely, absolutely. So that kind of takes us where we are today. None of that is really like settled out. We're seeing some I'm seeing a lot of agency leaders say, "Hey, we're waiting on interest rates to come back down, and we're hoping that that juices a little bit of spending by the brands, but they don't really know." There's green shoots throughout, but there's no like singular industry that's doing fantastic,
Hmm.
like end market industry that's doing fantastic.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting take. One of the things you had said that I want to like pull a thread on is you talked about the jagged edge of the growth, and there was those agencies that raised their rates pretty early. They did a good job managing that, and then you said those that maybe stayed or kind of stagnated on their rates, even though their costs were going up, typically they felt a little, and I'm using my own words here, but typically they feel a little sheepish in making that move, in
Yes.
part because of just like they didn't really have super solid rev gen, they weren't really positioned very well. And it just kind of reminded me of some conversations I've been having recently, which is um, the Warren Buffett quote of, it's when the tide goes out, you see all the people who've been swimming naked.
Yep.
And that's totally the case. And I think from what I can see, definitely 2023 and 2024 was the tide going out.
Mhm.
And it's not that every agency is suffering, although many are. It's just that the people who haven't properly been investing in a solid foundation, like we've been harping on, and I know you have been talking about for the better part of your time with Promethean Research, it's those people who have really been struggling to get back up on their feet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like it's one of those things where if you, this is why I harp on RevGen so hard, is if you have a pipeline and you look out into the next 3 to 6 months and that pipeline looks really good, you are going to make different, probably better decisions than if that pipeline is drying up and you're going to make more panicked, more,
Yes.
um, I guess, short sighted decision.
Yeah.
So it's a waterfall effect. It's
Mm-hmm.
really something if you have to solve this first.
Yeah, that's totally the case. It's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially as a fractional CFO and people in the finance seat, it can be
Mhm.
really easy for us to be. We tend to be pretty analytical. We tend to be pretty risk averse just by nature, especially those of us who are CPAs. And I think what oftentimes can happen is unknowingly we can actually contribute to the negative spiral, the downward spiral of agencies, because our focus can be on cost cutting in situations like this. When in reality, it's like,
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to be like wise. You don't obviously don't want to like overspend, but
Mhm.
you also don't want to just, slash and burn all of your costs, because you may unwittingly actually contribute to the continual decline, right? You might not have capacity to fulfill on the revenue. And, you're going to get worse and worse types of clients if you're not, properly spending in sales and in marketing. It was actually interesting because I was just having a conversation about this very topic. It's, we're faced with the situation of, do I focus more on revenue, bringing in clients or growing existing accounts, or do I focus on cutting costs? Because we're coming up to a cliff. What are we going to do?
Right.
And yeah, I feel like you're saying, it's like, man, a full pipeline cures a lot of problems.
Oh, it does. I've seen some very poorly run companies that have fantastic rev gen. They have fantastic pipelines, and that papers over so many cracks. It's not even
Mm,
funny. It's ridiculous.
totally.
Your point of like investment in sales and marketing, though, like I did a big report and research study where I asked a bunch of agencies what they spend on sales and marketing, and it's like 7% of revenue. Like that's to grow at average rates. And if there's average growth rate is like 15%. So if you want to grow faster than that, you have to spend more than that 7%, or you have to be more effective with it. um, People are very sophisticated now. You can't just shoot out 1,000 cold emails and get a bunch of responses now. So being more effective probably isn't the right lever. So increasing that percentage spend, or that proportion of spend beyond that 7% of revenue, I think that's where a lot of it is.
Mm,
Especially, and that's only if your goals are growth, though. Like, I think a lot of agencies are, but if you're looking for the margin stuff, then I guess sure, cut those. But like to your point, person you were talking to, if their goal is to like right the ship, you got to invest a little bit.
that's right. That's very much the case. And kind of on this topic, I know ideal client persona, ICP. How has that been evolving as these years have been progressing? And you took us through 2020, 2021, 22, and then onward. I imagine with all this, yeah, that's changed. ICP and how we go about trying to find that and clarify that. What's been your perspective as it relates to the development of the ideal client persona?
Yeah, it has become important. Like like I said, for the decade before 2020, it was pretty easy to grow a shop. You didn't really need a very dedicated ICP or a very detailed ICP. You could do pretty well without one. The general level of sophistication in the industry, it's up, it's risen, and it's continuing to rise. And now you have to actually like, if you Google like, how do I make an ICP? Like, you're gonna get a lot of pretty garbage advice. You're gonna get a lot of like, here, go through these motions, and you'll have an ICP at the end, and you're like, okay, well, I did that. I wasted a bunch of time. I wasted my team's time, and now we're not going to use it because it sucks. Like, don't do that. There's the reason you have an ICP is to narrow down who you're going to be delivering a message to.
Hmm.
Like the whole point of it is to better understand who your client should be and is, so that you can better connect with them. You're solving a problem, make sure that you're connecting with the people that have that problem, or change your solution. So I think, like in general, it's less of going through the motions. It's not just like we have an ICP to have an ICP and to stash it in a Google Doc somewhere and never see it. It's we have to go through and say, beyond like industry and company size and like key clients and geography and the general like firmographic stuff, you have to get into like corporate goals, their like overall like department that you sell into, department size, average budgets, purchase hurdles, things like what are the purchase triggers? Why do they actually? When do they need your service? And can you connect with them when they need it?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to get into like the finer details of like what makes an ICP successful now.
So, if I'm hearing you right, Nick, you are saying that it's not necessarily a great idea to just say, my ICP is B2B brands.
Oh no, um, no. I had one. I had a God. I had a prospect, and I was just asking them what their what. Tell me what your ideal client is, and they said we like to work with people in healthcare and manufacturing. I was like, do you have any idea how many companies you just told me your ideal is? I was like, do you have a size on that? Nope. Do you have a geography? No, we're going global. I was like, oh, but are you? Are you? Because I don't think you are. I don't think you're selling into like Laos.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Well,
So,
and you know, I think it reminds me of kind of the conventional wisdom that's just like if you're under a million, obviously if you're under a million in revenue, for sure, it's one ICP, it's one offer, and it's
mhm.
one. There's the three ones. I can't remember the third one is, but you got to
I
be
mean, it
really
sounds good. I
focused.
haven't heard this, but this sounds great.
Yeah. But what it is it's all about like you have to be hyper focused because I think a lot of times when you're first starting out, you think to yourself like there's such a limited mindset where you think if I don't serve everybody, I'm not going to be able to generate revenue. And in
Oh yeah,
reality, you're in a
yeah.
spot where if you aren't selling to one person, you know, one
Mhm.
profile and one offer, you're likely just going to get drowned out and really suffer in your growth.
Mhm. Yeah, I wrote a whole thing on that, all about like optionality. One of the things is like you saying no to something makes you feel like you're getting rid of options, and I want to reframe it to like, are they obtainable options?
Hmm.
Are they things that you could actually realize the value from? And if they are, then you really need to have that kind of assessment and look at them and choose which ones to go after. If there's stuff that like you could never obtain and never really pull off, um, then maybe they're not real options and they shouldn't factor into your consideration. Like if you're spreading your focus over stuff that is unobtainable, you're just spreading your focus. You're not actually able to ever grab that.
Could you? I'm imagining as you're saying that you're probably like there's probably a couple examples that are coming to mind of where that's actually been a real conversation you've had with a client or even a
Mhm.
prospect. Could you give just for our listeners so they can visualize this? Can you give an example of like that?
Yeah. So if you're a dev company, a web dev shop, and you maybe have aspirations of building a WYSIWYG site builder because you feel like there's not enough out there, or they they didn't do it right, or whatever reason, and you are not interested in taking VC money, and you do not have the capital to float that kind of product investment on your own, and you probably never will. That's not a real option. Like building out a product like that that would take tens of millions of dollars to get to like minimum viable product standpoint, like not even fully built out, sold into the space, but like having the prototype pretty well fleshed out. You can never actually capture that. So I see a lot of shops that are like, well, we might want to do a product, so we got to keep this person on staff, or we might want to do this, so we have to keep this open. We can't say no to manufacturing because we might have clients that come in once every 5 years that do manufacturing. I'm like, well, there are much shorter paths to success and building something that is actually meaningful, that is much larger, that you can capture by focusing and saying no to a lot of those things and getting rid of the options that aren't really options.
Yeah, so you have to be realistic with yourself, and sometimes when you're doing blue sky dreaming, which I think is important, especially early on,
Yeah,
and honestly, probably even continuously, you also need to be realistic about what's actually attainable, though, and especially with the size company that you are.
I 100% agree. Like down that path of like blue sky dreaming, when AI hit, you had companies that weren't focused, and they had 300 irons in the fire, and they were trying to manage all of them at once. They didn't have the ability to spread talent and to spread time over experimenting with AI. They just didn't have the space to do it because they had so many other things that they were trying to spread focus on. If you do focus, it lets you get rid of it gives you something to filter those shiny objects through. And when one comes through, when a shiny object comes through that looks like AI, and that is something that could really meaningfully impact your business, you can let that in. But you can say no to all of the other nonsense. And having that rubric is super
Oh,
important.
yeah, totally. So, I mean, we're talking about ICP here and defining
Oh yeah.
it, and one of the things that you had talked about, I know you and I had this conversation earlier, is with ICP also comes an understanding of buying committees. Now,
Right.
when you told me that, I was like, first of all, I never really heard that term before, and I think the reason for it is I typically don't play in enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
accounts, and typically the clients that I work with, sometimes they'll work with enterprise, but for the most part, they're more small and medium size. So would you mind, first of all, just unpacking what is a buying committee? And yeah, how would you, we'll start with that. Explain for us a
What
buying
is it
committee.
by? It's a way to categorize the various stakeholders that come into play during a deal. Full stop. That's it. Like it's literally like if you sell to a VP of marketing, that is going to be your like internal advocate. That is categorized as that person at that company that's going to go to bat for you. Your solution really changes their life and makes it easier for them. So they're going to try to convince their boss and other people in their company to go with your solution because to them it's the right thing and it solves something. Beyond that, you have other stakeholders, right? You have influencers, people like if marketing has to talk through IT or through security or legal or whoever else in the organization, they will all like on larger accounts they will all come together to decide and figure out if your solution is the right thing to go with. So you have to be aware that they're going to come to the table and you have to be prepared for those conversations. Finally, there's the person that controls the budget or the sometimes they're the same, but like final decision maker. So like it could be like CFO for budget and CEO for final decision. In much larger accounts, it can be CFO for budget and like VP for the final decision, or CMO, some other like C level for final decision. Sometimes they're the same person. But again, you have to have a different conversation with them because like you walk into a CEO, you're not going to hit the same, like you shouldn't be hitting the same kind of beats that you would when you're having the initial conversation with the person who it directly impacts. Right? The CEO probably wants a solution and wants to like de-risk this deal. The person that really gets impacted by this could be like really excited about it and could not be so worried about getting a massive ROI out of it. They need an ROI big enough to like not have it raise eyebrows, basically.
Hmm.
So that's the buyer committee. It's a way of categorizing all of the stakeholders that you deal with and interact with and who can influence a deal.
Got it. And it sounds like from experience, this is something that you typically will help your clients through as they're
Mm,
establishing some of their rev gen strategies. As you help them kind of formulate, all right, once you've identified your ICP, you're also kind of also architecting and understanding the buying committee that's involved in that, right?
exactly. They flow right into one another. So the ICP is something you build out first. And then from that ICP, you should have a narrow enough thing to be able to understand like I'm selling into typically the marketing department or IT or whatever. And this is the person who usually leads that department in the like size of company that I sell into.
I
And
gotcha.
from there, you build out that kind of org chart map.
So, what would be some methods that agencies could be using to accurately identify the stakeholders that are in the buying committee?
Um, Look at who you've interacted with in the past. So I love, even through the ICP development, going through your past clients and understanding who you've had success with, the ones that are easier to work with, or the ones that are more enjoyable to work with, or maybe get you bigger accounts later on. Like, what are those kind of like patterns that you've seen be really successful and really easy? And then just go through there and say, okay, well, we've gone into, I don't know, say 20 accounts, 19 of them have been CMOs that we've primarily interacted with. Your internal advocate then would probably be the CMO.
Got it. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
taking a look at other clients who have been successful already, and then try
Yeah.
to articulate that. That's a good point, because I was even going through this exercise myself, and I was like, yeah, usually it's like the COO type person or the integrator
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
for me personally.
Right.
Um,
And that's why you have to do it by agency. There's no like
hmm,
prescription out there to say, oh,
mhm,
go do this. It will shift based on ICP, and
hmm,
you should have a buying committee for each ICP.
hmm.
So like that's another piece of it to layer on. Um,
Interesting. So you would say buying committees exist even in those medium and small size entities.
oh yeah.
Unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Think about it. Like if you go to if you go to sell into a mid-market business, say $100 million manufacturing company, uh, they're going to have a CEO, they're going to have a CMO, they're going to have different people throughout their org chart that handle different pieces. And if you're trying to sell a website into that, you're going to have multiple people in that deal. And so each one of those stakeholders, even at a smaller, like once you get below say 10 million, you're probably going to be start interacting with the founder or CEO directly. That's a buying committee of one. Like
Mhm.
that's literally just all of these things rolled into one person. The reason you do the buying committee is so you can build content that hits that buying committee, each individual, at different aspects of when they enter or where they are in the buying process.
Hmm.
So if somebody's just being introduced to you, you want to give them different content than if they've seen you 100 times. So this buying committee lets you map that kind of content plan to each of these. So if you're selling into a smaller company, you still have to go through that building that content, because that same person is going to be walking through the like introduction. Who are you? What are your capabilities? All that kind of stuff through, hey, let me build trust with you. Can I see some case studies? Can you share some people that you've worked with, maybe some referrals or recommendations? So you still have to do that process. It's just with the same person.
Yeah. And this is probably an important distinction to make here, is when we're talking about buying committees, we're not necessarily saying this is like synonymous with the RFP process.
Yeah, it
Although
could be.
yeah, I mean, although arguably like the RFP process probably is going to touch a lot of
Yeah,
the buying
absolutely.
committee.
Yeah,
But
procurement's a whole, yes, that's a whole separate monster.
interesting, interesting. Well, that's a man. That's a really really good take. I think another thing that comes to my mind when I think about just thinking back to my days in corporate world, and being on the finance teams. I know how often when major decisions are made on large accounts, you're going to tend to get some pretty analytical minds involved. I mean, I even just think about an engagement or a potential mini project that you and I are going to hopefully work on together.
Yeah,
And I think about the importance of data. Would you mind like sharing a little bit about what is some of the data that's going to be important or relevant in coming to a buying committee?
you mean for like each, like the individuals, like how to connect with them? Is
Yeah, I think so. I
that what you're
think
thinking?
yeah, like how would you shape your approach to the type of data that you should be ready to pull together? Like, is this just going to be
Mhm.
is this going to be all, we're just going to be able to persuade them just by how well we speak, or like, do we need to have hard numbers of like ROI numbers? Like, what's the data
Oh
that they
yeah,
need to be
no,
seeing?
that's a fantastic question. That's exactly like where that falls into like where are they in the kind of like funnel of of working with you and familiarity with you. Furthermore, it's influenced, like you said, based on like how analytical they are, what they're, you eventually want like mini dossiers for everyone in your standard buying committee. So if you have an analyst or a, if you have, you know, CFO Tony coming in and he's going to rip apart this ROI calculation, you better have something rock solid and a few of them to back it up. So when he sees it and it comes across his desk, that content is really easy for him to digest, sift through, understand the determinants that go into your models, understand the various details that come out of it. And that's not something that you would provide to maybe a a design leader. Maybe the design leader, if you're doing something for, I don't know, a really design focused brand, they might not, that might not be a good content piece to get to them because it's not going to resonate. That doesn't cross off any of the pain points that they have or the concerns that they have or buying hurdles that they have. So that when you build that content out to like sales collateral and marketing collateral to get through that buying process, to get through a deal, uh, it's a lot easier if you can build it out on the front end, even templated, and then you can customize it based like during the deal itself. Does that
So
answer the question? I
I
feel
think
like I
so.
may
Yeah,
have
I think so. I
tangent.
I think maybe like a follow up to that would be, I can intuit, or we can just kind of, try to use our brains to assume, okay, I think that person would need this type of data and this person doesn't really need the data because that's not how they process decisions. Like how, especially as we figure out ICP and we figure out buying committee, how can we, what's like the best approach to make sure that we're getting the right information
Yeah.
and data in front of the right people and that we're not overlooking that?
So when you build your ICP, you're thinking about all those past clients and who the buying committee is for that ICP that you've worked with in the past. Have conversations with them. Like that's pretty important. Like you should have an idea and have a relationship with them to be able to ask them. Say, hey, when you're purchasing a solution like this, what would have made it easier? What would you have loved to have? What would you love to see like super early on or midway through or when you're making that final decision? Like what would have been helpful? Is a pitch deck helpful? If it is, great. Is a capability helpful deck helpful? If it is, great. If it's not, though, I would consider excluding it. Like maybe there's a comparative rate card or something. If you're trying to be low cost, you can include that. Maybe there's, I don't know, some kind of specialized ROI calc or something for a specific thing that you do that they'd be like, well, that could be awesome. Like ask them and then prompt them. So say, hey, what would have been helpful? And then you could say, would this have been helpful? Would this thing that we're thinking about creating have influenced your decision at all?
Hmm.
And if they say yes, and you get enough of those yeses, obviously, like don't have this conversation just with one person. Have it
Hmm.
with a lot of them. When you start getting signal back, then go to them and say, hey, can we include a ROI based on your project to help other people get past purchasing hurdles? That, or even a testimonial or something. That's a fantastic time to do that kind of stuff, and it usually goes a long way.
And it's, I mean, it seems like such low hanging fruit. And I would imagine there's still plenty of agencies who aren't doing that. They're not following up with their previous clients to have that type of targeted, specific question of what would have made the buying decision for us
Mm-hmm.
easier. It's a really, really insightful
No,
question.
no one. Very few people are doing it.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I have a RevGen review service where I go through and I'll check all these boxes. Like, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? What's missing from your RevGen strategy and system? Almost, and I've done this for companies that have had like 5 employees, and I've done this for companies with 300 employees, and none of them have had ICPs dialed in to the level that is necessary.
Hmm.
So nobody's doing it, or if they are, they're not hiring me because they've already done
Right. That's good.
it, which is
Uh,
good too.
Yeah, that's well, and I think with the conversation we've been having with ICPs and buying committees, I know this is something you talk a lot about. I certainly am a big fan that you are talking about it, which is specialization, right?
Yeah.
So not only clarifying who it is you're serving, but also the specialization of what it is you're doing.
Mhm.
What have you seen in terms of the financial benefits for agencies that specialize in a particular service?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I do have specializing by service and vertical.
Yeah, let's go for that.
So when you're like when you're specializing by both of those, you will grow on average twice as fast as someone who's a pure generalist. That's panned out in 2 or 3 surveys so far over the last few years. Uh, Around 100 agencies in each survey. So it's a large enough sample size for me to feel very confident saying, like, we always kind of intuitively knew specialization was impactful. Now it's playing out in the data. And these are average rates too. This isn't even like me saying, like, yes, you specialized and then did you do it well? Like, yes, you said industry and service, but did you connect that message that really drives the home why you're the only solution to
Mm,
present to this person in that industry and for that service? I don't know. So what I'm saying is, I think the bar for specialization is set pretty low right now. I think you can get much better results than just 2x growth. I think you can kind of blow it through the roof, really, if that's something you want to go to. And we've seen the benefits of focus in other places as well.
yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting is some of your previous reports. I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022, but some of your other previous reports, it was showing the same 2x performance. It's not like
Yeah.
it's a thing now, but it wasn't before. It's like it's been
Right.
this way for a while.
Yeah. It's panned out for a number of years now. I mean, like the industry itself has been there's been a drumbeat from analysts and from consultants repeatedly for, I don't know, as long as I've been in the industry, at least a decade, uh, that agencies should specialize. And I think they intuitively knew. I didn't see data before this. They may have had internal data that they used to influence that, but now it's something that it's very much it's in hard numbers. Like, it's, you can argue with it, but you're going to be arguing while you're growing half as fast.
Hmm. Yes, very true. So I have a theory. I've been throwing it around to a couple of people I've been talking with. I'd love to get your thoughts on my theory
Yeah.
here. And as you know, so I started my work with digital agencies mainly focused on software development agencies. That was
Mhm.
I still have a very, very big heart for my software devs out there. And what I, if anecdotally, have been seeing is in the software development space, there's still a degree to which it's not nearly as commoditized as marketing agencies or more creative agencies. And I say this because I think things that are a little bit softer services, things that are maybe more creative services, have had an easier time proliferating in overseas offshore talent and development. And so it's been easier to become a commodity. But for more hard and technical skills, it's not to say that we aren't seeing a commoditization happening, but we are seeing it has taken a little bit longer to get to a spot where it's a commoditized service. And so my theory is that what marketing agencies and more creative agencies have been facing in the need to go for a specialization is something that software dev agencies haven't yet had to feel too hard. Because I know
Mhm.
dev agencies who are growing leaps and bounds and they refuse to specialize because they're like, well, I mean, like we're getting so much, inbound traffic, like we're just growing and we're not even trying. So curious to get your theory on, or your response on my theory.
It doesn't sound out of the picture. Like, it sounds like it could be pretty solid. I think within, I think you have to be a little more. You have to get a little more fidelity on it, though. Like, there are marketing things that have not commoditized yet, and there are some that have, obviously. Same with like dev work. The low hanging brochure websites that were like 7 to 9 pages, no interactivity beyond a contact form, that is as commoditized as like social media posting right now. You started seeing those site builders come in and cut out that bottom part of the market. I don't know, 5 years ago, really was when it kind of kicked off. Um, and that's pretty much gone. I don't know if I'm on the same boat where it's a geographic thing. I'm not saying that doesn't play a part in it. I think it's one of those things where it's like, is it easy to get to do the thing? Is it easy, and can you find somebody to do whatever it is you said you were going to do? And with like AI coming on board, that's just been another thing that has shot various services down because it's been super easy to replicate it, or replicate what those people were doing. So I don't think it's a wrong theory. I don't think that it's I think there's a lot more at play. It's too much
Mm,
to be like there's too many forces and levers being pulled in that space to commoditize something where
mm,
it's really hard to draw a line to one thing.
hmm. I could see that. There's a little bit more. There's more nuance to that conversation, is what I'm hearing you
There
say.
always is. There always is, right?
Yeah, I that makes a ton of sense. So, talking again though about specializing in services, you already mentioned 2x growth. Typically, the data proves it's about 2 times the growth. What would you say are some good and effective pricing strategies when it comes to specialized service?
Everybody goes almost everybody goes right to value based. And I don't know if I am on that train as much as everybody else is.
Hmm,
I've seen very successful shops do some combination of time and materials, retainer, and project based
hmm,
stuff. And that's not to say you can't price project based and retainer on, like the value based basis. Like you absolutely can. I guess even time and materials to some extent if you wanted to like get pedantic with it. But
hmm,
as far as like answering your question, I think if you can be that like singular solution to a problem for a specific person,
hmm,
value based is the way to go. I think there's so much competition in the market and so much substitutes, like availability of substitutes, where yes, you might be able to give them 100x ROI. Somebody else might be able to give them 90. And if you're
hmm,
value pricing 100x ROI, they're not just going to look at you and say, "Oh, well, they're the only one that can do it." The client usually has more insight into market rates than the agency owner. They see more. They see more proposals. They see more rate cards. So they're going to look at this versus the 90x ROI, and they're going to say, well, they're pricing just on a flat project fee or time and materials. We're probably going to go with them. So I think it depends on your skill and your team's skill in sales and the kind of stuff that you can put in place around it, the support
hmm,
structure.
hmm,
If you do have that and you can do it really well, for sure, go value based.
hmm,
If you are lagging in that at all, I see no issue doing some combination of like retainer and project. And on that space, it's really a balance of like, do you want stability or do you want growth? Like if you want really hyper growth, go more project based. If you want more stability, obviously go more retainer based.
hmm. Yeah, that's it's helpful to hear that. I think what you had said just then about if you have really strong and seasoned salespeople,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it would make sense to try to pursue more value pricing. I was just having a conversation with another agency owner who is over in Switzerland, and he was talking about this on his show with me, and he was saying that basically that it can be really hard, even though we know that value pricing to an extent is kind of this holy grail that we all want to achieve. It can be really hard to take somebody who doesn't necessarily think that way or doesn't like think about how to approach a conversation with like really good sales acumen. It's hard to upskill them. So it's not as easy as just like, all right, we're going to go do value pricing. It's like you do have to up level the people who are actually in the business development role.
And for it to work, you have to believe in the value of yourself. So
Mm,
that's one thing that I've run into too, where people are like, agency leaders are like, "There's no one's going to pay that. The market rate's this."
mm,
I'm like, well, you're showing significant value. You're showing that you're able to pull that off. Like, obviously, no, this isn't a good thing for you to do because you don't believe in it yourself. But like, if you did, you could totally do it.
hmm. That's helpful. So what I'm hearing you say is like it's still possible to be successful from a pricing perspective, even if you're not doing value pricing. You can still be
Oh
successful
yeah,
going for retainers and hourly projects.
even hourly, just
Mm-hmm.
straight up time and materials. You can throw a $500 an hour rate on there. It's kind of value based pricing, but it's kind of not. Like
Mm-hmm.
again, it gets kind of weird when you get into definitions.
Yeah. So my one issue though with hourly pricing, because I do agree. Like I think especially in the software development world where the whole framework is you want it to remain agile because that's one of the best ways to develop software. And
Mm-hmm.
so hourly pricing helps you to do that well. My issue with hourly pricing is the psychology behind it, where it's this is maybe just it's anecdotal, but from what I can see, hourly pricing tends to bring the most cognitive dissonance when people see the rate. right? Like you can
Oh,
look
for
at,
sure.
because even when you say $500 an hour, like I know for a fact you're going to have so many more groans than if you were to say
Mhm.
$2,000, but maybe it's only going to take me 4 hours. Like you're much more likely to close the $2,000 project than you are the $500 an hour project.
No, I totally agree with that. That goes into the sales piece and that positioning piece and all of the like all of that should not be a hard conversation, I guess is what I'm saying. There's a lot of pre-work to do before you even get to that point. That if you do it and you do it right and you do it well, that's an easy kind of thing. So I think that issue and that friction of selling a 2000 thing is easier than selling a $500 an hour thing comes because that pre-work is not usually done. Like
Bingo.
we just talked about how few people have ICPs that are actually well developed.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think I want to double down on that, because I think that if I were to say that the overarching theme here, it would be that the number one reason why things are breaking down or things aren't working, the strategy isn't working, is most of the time we don't even have a good solid foundation of an ICP, of specialization of our services, of that buying committee. We don't have that groundwork laid. And so we go to market and our offer just falls on deaf ears or just falls
yeah,
flat when we have conversations. And we think to ourselves, well, this stuff just doesn't work. It's like, no, it does, but we haven't done the right pre-work, like you said.
yeah, that's a fantastic summation.
So maybe with all this, we're bringing it down to a close here. We've talked about a lot of different pieces. How crucial is it for agencies as they've addressed all these different pieces? How crucial is it for agencies to remain nimble, especially in the face of the market shifts that we've been seeing?
I mean, your average agency is small, right? Your average agency is in that like 20 to maybe that's high, maybe 15 to 20 employees. Use that to your advantage. Like it's crazy how quick you can move and reorg and go after something different as the market shifts. And contrast that with how many agencies want to put like processes and procedures and bureaucracy on stuff. That stuff has a place, but it has to be used very sparingly.
Hmm.
It's not a solve for like good management. Processes only do so much.
Hmm.
So being nimble and being able to react to market shifts, we saw it in what was the name of it? Navigating Change. That report. That was a state of the industry report. And the ones that actually shifted their service mix, they reacted to what was in the marketplace, and they said these old services aren't doing the right thing for us, so we're going to shift to this other service mix. It's not necessarily more services, it's not fewer services. They grew significantly faster than
Mm-hmm.
average. Like they blew it out of the water. You can grow just by adding on more services, but again, that saps focus and it makes the whole thing a little more like bolted on Frankenstein.
Hmm.
Uh, Reorganizing where you're going to shift that service focus, and I would say even shifting your industry focus, being nimble with that too. Both of those can be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I don't know if people are hearing this and they might be thinking to themselves, they're thinking, wait, hold on. We're going to do all this work in identifying our ICP and identifying our
Yeah,
buying committee. And then wait, you're telling me that like we need to be willing to kind of throw all that out the window and shift? Like, what
light
would
it
you
on
say to somebody like that?
fire. Light it on fire. Here's the thing: have an understanding of where your value is in the marketplace.
Hmm.
Have an understanding of where that value comes from. Like, yes, you're building a website. Yes, you're developing software. Why is the person purchasing that software? Are they doing it just to check a box? Are they doing it just because like their boss told them to, or they're getting nagged from HR to get a better system in place? Like, what is the driver? What are the trends underlying the reason your services are purchased? Once you understand those, that lets you position yourself into channels that are going more quickly or have longer width, like length on them, so you can sit on that ICP and not have to update it as often. Realistically, with how quickly things have been changing, like re-looking at this, like maybe every other year, maybe every 3 years is probably appropriate.
Okay. So yeah. So giving yourself, maybe it's not every single year that you're kind of turning over the rock again, but at least every other year or so, you're kind of revisiting the
Yes,
conversation.
yes, exactly.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, man, I wish we had so much more time to talk because we got lots more to cover. But this just
Let's
means,
do it again.
yeah, let's get you on again,
As long
Nick.
as I didn't make everybody mad, let's do it again.
No, that's the greatest thing. You got to stir the pot. Got to keep stirring the
Oh,
pot.
I did that with one of my newsletters.
That's so great.
I
I
don't know
still
if I need to do
remember.
that often.
Well, I was gonna say I still remember one of the things you talked about with it still sticks in my head: scaling versus growth, scale and
That's
growth.
exactly it. That's exactly the newsletter I'm talking about. I got so much hate mail for that, and then I also, on the other hand, got so many people like, "Yes, why didn't you? Why has nobody said this before?" I was like, "I'm
Right?
sure they have. I'm not.
Oh.
I'm not a clairvoyant person on this one."
Well, I guess on the topic of the newsletter, I would highly recommend for our listeners
Thank
go
you.
and sign up. Like it doesn't cost money; just go sign up.
It's all free.
I kid you not, Nick. Every single time I see your name pop up in my inbox for that newsletter, I read it. I take time to read it
Thank you.
because it's packed with so much value and it's packed with so many like it's so easy to read, and like you talked about, it's a narrative. It's not just like numbers on a page. Anyway, so would highly recommend go sign up for that. Where can people go to sign up for that, and where can people go to find you?
Yeah, prometheanresearch.com. So like you'll find everything there, the newsletters in the footer. I probably put like 80% of my effort and time into the newsletter now. I don't really blog anymore. I don't really post on LinkedIn. I kind of do, but like if you want to follow along and you want, the latest research and stuff and thinking on the digital agency space, you're going to find it in my newsletter.
I love that. So go, if you're listening, go and sign up for the newsletter today. Don't wait. Nick, as always, my friend, it's been lovely to chat, and I look forward to talking again in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. Like it's always great chatting with you.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value in our episode today, please leave us a review and tell your friends about us. If you're interested in being a guest on our show, as a digital agency owner, or maybe somebody with insights that can help digital agencies grow, head over to our website to learn more at equip.com/podcast guest. That's ACCQUIP.com/podcast guest.